Okay, I think we're live. Hi everyone. For those new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author and editor, and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading, and all the other things I love. And it's the reading we're here for today because we are only a day away from the end of the month. So I am here to do my end of the month reading wrap up, just to give you a brief overview of the books I've been reading the past few weeks during November. We've got a few to get through, so I'm going to crack straight on. Let me get rid of this banner out of our way. There we go. Okay, so as I said, we've got a few, and the first few are from NetGalley. So first up is Ninja by Stephen Turnbull. This is a non-fiction book looking at the ninja in terms of the myth and the truth, and you know, how things have developed. It was quite interesting. It kind of looks at what is actually real and known about the ninja and what is just a myth that's developed and how that myth developed over the years, in particularly fairly recently, really. And this one was a 4-star read for me. It was pretty interesting. It got bogged down here and there a little bit in detail, but on the whole, it was an enjoyable read that certainly kept me turning the pages. Next up, another non-fiction from NetGalley was Burying the Dead by Lorraine Evans. This one was a 4.5-star read for me. And this book is looking at burial practices around the world and through the ages. So different types of burials, particularly weird burials for sort of combating vampirism and things like that. So this was really fascinating. If you're someone who enjoys visiting cemeteries, is interested in death and burial, then this is definitely one that you'll find interesting, because it does cover everywhere from South America through Asia and Europe. Next up, I read a few from the library. So the first of these is Revenge by Ogawa Youko. So Revenge is an interesting book. It's essentially horror, but it's a collection of short tales, and each of these tales is very cleverly linked in some way to what went before. So one tale kind of bleeds into the next. Although it's horror, this is not scary, edge of your seat, can't sleep at night horror. It's not especially gory or frightening or anything, so even a non-horror reader like me could enjoy it. I definitely thought the best thing about it was the clever way in which all these stories interlinked, and they were certainly very imaginative and intriguing tales, and so I gave it 5 stars. Another library book I borrowed by Kawakami Hiromi was Record of a Night Too Brief. This, excuse me, this was also a collection of short stories. So I'm just trying to think how to best describe them. I think the blurb says they're about loss and romance, but they're really, really super bizarre, quirky, fantastical tales. I mean, I almost want to say magical realism, but the realism is really out the window. They're just super zany, and you just have to read them and accept them and go with the flow. For me, they were 4 stars. I did enjoy them, but I kind of wished I could get a little bit more sense out of them here and there. The next couple I'm going to mention are back to NetGalley, but I'm not going to give a full review because I've been asked by the publisher to hold my review until the book's release in the new year. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what they're about and what star rating I gave them. But if you want to know what I really thought about them, take a look at my blog in the new year when I'll be sharing my reviews. They're coming out between January and beginning of April. There's about 4 books, 3 of which I'll mention today. So the first up is These Feathered Flames by Alexandra Overy, which was a 4-star read for me. This is a book that is loosely based on the myth of the firebird from Russian folklore. And we have 2 sisters who were born as twins. And so it's destined that one of them will become queen and the other one will take over the mantle of the firebird. And the firebird's role is to find anyone who has done magic without paying the necessary price and extracting that price in order to keep a balance. And the firebird's magic plus magic in the kingdom in general is what keeps it safe from its neighbours. But there's a worry that the magic has been fading of late. So that's the basic premise. This is the first book of a series, so it does end with a lead into something else that's going to happen. But that's all I'm going to say about it for now until I officially bring out my review. In a similar way, I also read The I Am Raven by Julie Kagawa, which is the latest book, or the first book in her new series, which is linked to the I Am Fae series, but it can be read as a standalone. So for me, this was another 4-star read. I actually never finished reading the Iron Face series. I only read the first book. And I think if you'd read more of them, this story would probably mean more to you. But it was still readable on its own. But again, I'll save the main review for later. But this story basically follows Robin Goodfellow as our main character. But we do have interactions where he joins up with characters from the Iron Face series as they battle a new threat. And next up, back to the library for another Ogawa Youko book, The Housekeeper and the Professor. This was a 4.5-star read for me. The premise of this one is that there's a woman, she's a housekeeper, she's got a young son who she's supporting on her own, and she gets a job working at the house of this semi-retired professor. He still publishes papers and things, but he's a recluse, mostly because his memory only lasts for 18 hours. And after that, he doesn't remember. He can remember stuff from the past, but any recent events he only can keep for a very short period. He has himself covered in post-it notes with bits of information that he needs to be able to remember when he wakes up and things each day. So once he goes to sleep, that's it. This was a really intriguing story. He's a maths professor, and there was a huge amount of maths in the book, which for a non-maths person like me was a bit too much here and there. But the story itself and the interaction between the characters, and particularly the themes of looking at memory and how much does memory affect how we relate to people and how we interact with people, and the idea of family and friendships and how they're formed. They were all really interesting. So, as I said, it's a 4.5-star read, but it might have been a 5 if there'd been a bit less maths involved. Sticking to the library, I also read The Silence of Bones by June He. Now, this is a YA historical mystery. It's set in the late Chosun era Korea. And our main character is a sort of slave servant, who works with the police, and there's a bit of a murder spree going on that she ends up having to get involved in, partly because she, as a woman, is allowed to touch the murdered female women, whereas the men are not allowed to. So that's how kind of she gets involved, even despite her position. I thought Sol, our heroine, was a really well-drawn character, and I liked her interactions, particularly with Inspector Han. You could really see their relationship developing through the book. The mystery elements worked well. It's just that for me, about halfway through, I thought things stagnated a bit. It started off really compellingly, and I feel like I'm going to sneeze any second, so I'm sorry. I'll try not to. It started off really compellingly, and I was deeply engaged in the story and what was happening, but I kind of felt the pacing slowed a lot in the second half of the book, and if they'd kept up that good movement, I think it would have worked better. So for me, it was 3.5 stars, and if the pacing hadn't been an issue, it probably would have been 4. But if you're interested in, we don't see a lot of murder mystery type YA out there, not that I've come across anyway. So if you're interested in that, it's definitely one to check out, particularly if you like historical stories and different settings than the norm as well. We don't see a huge amount. We're starting to see a few Asian-related stories coming out, Korean stories, but it's still fairly new. So if you're looking for something like that, this is one you should pick up. The next one is the third one I mentioned in this trio that I can't actually give my full review for yet, but I can tell you it's called The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, and it was a 4-star read. And the premise of this one, it's one of those dual timeline kind of stories. In the past, we have this apothecary, and she's a woman who is very secretive. She only helps other women, and she helps them essentially poison any dodgy men in their lives, be it husbands, brothers, and anyone they need to escape from. She assists them, and she keeps a secret ledger of all those transactions. And in the current time, an American woman who's run away from her cheating husband is caught up in trying to uncover the mystery of who this woman was. So it's there's plenty of books like that out there, all these sort of historical kind of mysteries that are solved in the current era with the 2 timelines going back and forth. If you like that sort of thing, then you definitely find something to love in this one. As I said, it's 4 stars for me, but I'll talk about more how I felt about it in my written review in my blog in the new year. Next up, Intermittent Fasting for Dummies by Dr. Janet Bond-Brill from NetGalley. This was a 4-star read for me. I spotted this book on NetGalley literally a few days after I decided to try this intermittent fasting things. My sister-in-law's been doing it and she was talking about it. And I thought, well, maybe that would work really well for me, because you're just restricting when you're eating, but not what you're eating. And I really can't be dealing with counting calories and things like that. So I thought maybe this one is a good idea for me. So I'm giving it a try at the moment. So I stop eating at 8 o'clock is the aim every night. And then I don't eat again until 12 the next day. And this book was just outlining both that way of doing it that I'm following, but also there's some other options and different ways of doing it. And the book was quite good. It outlined the different options, how you'd approach them, the science behind it, even gave you some recipes of some things you could try. So it was pretty informative. It's in the For Dummies series. It's pretty standard, good source of information. So if you're thinking about trying intermittent fasting, it might be worth checking out, because it does, as I say, give you the different ways of doing it so you can pick what's going to work best for you. Next up is The Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Tsujimura. If I can speak, it would help. Tsujimura Mizuki. This is a NetGalley book, and it was a 5-star read for me. Interestingly, I recently got a new friend in Japan via the Slowly app. And she's not a big reader, but when I was talking about which Japanese authors I've read and asked if she could recommend anything, she said that although she doesn't read a lot of books, she really loved this one. And at the time, it wasn't available in English. And then suddenly I saw on NetGalley that there's an English language translation coming out in the new year. So I requested it straight away, and luckily I was granted it. The premise of this book is quite interesting. It's a group of teens, a group of children who are all at high school, essentially. But they're all school dropouts for various reasons. They're not going to school, or not going to school where they should be going. There's sort of a little bit of manoeuvring going on there. And they discover that they can pass through mirrors in their bedrooms into this magical castle. And the castle is run by a woman wearing a wolf mask, who's known as the Wolf Queen. And she sets them this challenge that they have a year, essentially, and they can stay in the castle. They can come and go whenever they want during the daytime, but they have to leave by 5 p.m. every day, because if they don't, they'll be eaten by the wolves. And while they're in the castle, they need to search for a magical key. And whoever finds the key and then makes it to the wishing room can have their wish granted. But once a wish is granted, the castle will shut. The others will not be able to return, and no one will remember anything about what happened. So I don't want to give too much away. There's quite a few twists and turns in this. But essentially, I thought it was a beautifully written novel. The basic theme, or the main theme running through it, is the idea of children's mental health. Because I understand that in Japan, and I would assume in China and Korea as well, since they all have similar focus on education, a lot of pressure is obviously put on children to do well academically. And it has led to mental health problems for some young people. So it's kind of looking at that through this fantasy lens. And I thought it was beautifully planned out book, really well paced. And there were, as I said, plenty of twists and turns, many of which I didn't see coming, which continually put a different slant on things as the story continued. I enjoyed the interaction between the characters, and you really did see them develop throughout the story. And all up, it was just a really wonderfully written book. So it's a 5-star read for me. Excuse me while I have another drink. My throat's just going today. Okay. Next up was another NetGalley read called Bookishness by Jessica Pressman. This was a 3-star read for me. When I'm thinking about how to describe this book, it says it's about looking at the book as an object and symbol, and how part of the belief in the death of the book with e-readers and everything pressing on has led to books becoming kind of an aesthetic thing, in the way we all wear the books, the scarves now with book quotes and things like that. And so I thought the focus of this book would be on looking at some of those different quirky objects, where have they come from, how are people using them, things like that. And that was mentioned a bit. However, the principal focus of this was on looking at certain books that the author felt had been written in reaction to this idea of the death of the book, which might have been interesting if I had actually heard of any of these books that she was talking about. Now, as you know from all these vlogs I do, I read a lot. I probably average at 180 to 200 books a year. sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And yet I'd never even heard of a single one of these, let alone read them. So all those chapters I pretty much just ended up skimming through because it didn't mean anything to me what she was talking about because I didn't know the books. They all sounded really quite avant-garde and a bit bizarro. So I'm kind of feeling that it's not something most general readers will have read either. So I think that's really limited the appeal of the book. I think she would have done much better to, perhaps do a little bit of that, but focus more on the sort of quirky idea of the book as art and the book as fashion now, and the way we're all wearing all these quotes and doing all these other bookish things, which I thought was a shame. I just think it was perhaps not the best focal point that she could have picked, which is why it's 3 stars for me. Next up, returning to the library for The Diving Pool. Again, this is by Ogawa Youko. And this one was a 4.5 star read for me. This is another collection of stories. There are 3 stories in this one. The first of which is the title story, which revolves around a girl who's got a bit of a crush on this boy and likes to go and watch him diving in the school swimming pool. But at the same time, there's this dark side of her where she likes tormenting this other younger girl. So these are all pretty dark tales. I mean, not horror, but psychologically dark, perhaps we'll say. But they were all very interesting. Really beautifully crafted short stories, perfectly paced, with interesting themes and really relatable and yet memorable characters as well. Next up, back to NetGalley for Whisper Me a Love Song Volume 1 by Takeshima Eku. So this is a manga, and it's an LGBT manga with lesbian content, essentially. So we have 2 girls, they're in high school, one slightly older, and the younger one sees the older one performing in a band, in a concert, and falls in love with her. However, as they grow closer, it seems that their ideas of what love is are somewhat different. For me, this was a 4.5 star read. I thought it was a really sweet, it was super cute story. I liked the illustration style, and it definitely left me thinking that I wanted to find out more about how this relationship between these 2 girls would progress and whether they'd be able to work out the differences in how they're feeling and thinking about each other. So definitely worth checking out. It's the first time I've read an FF manga. I've read lots of boys' love previously, but this was a first for me, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was super sweet. We're nearly there. We've got 3 to go. So sticking with NetGalley, I also read Sketching Techniques for Artists by Hillkurtz. This was a 4-star read for me. This is a fairly short book. It's called Sketching Techniques for Artists, and it says it covers a lot of things, which it kind of does. However, for example, the section on figure drawing, figure sketching is pretty short, only a few pages. And it opens with all the usual stuff about what materials to use and various things. I think for me, this book is probably one I'd recommend to you only if you were looking at doing architectural drawing in particular, or maybe landscapes as well. If you want figure drawing, there are plenty of books that just specialize in that out there that would give you more information and better focus. But this book had some really fascinating sections on approaching drawing architecture, different elements of architecture like the windows and buttresses and various things. I looked a little bit about landscape and choosing the right angle to make things really pop. And so that was all really interesting. But as I said, it's probably best if you're looking at that kind of landscape, cityscape drawing. Next up, I read The Madman's Library by Edward Brooke-Hitching. This is another NetGalley read, and it was a 5-star read for me. And this book is essentially a compendium of bizarre books in the world through time. So the world's smallest books, biggest books, books that were made out of human skin. It's just like an eclectic collection of all these strange and wondrous different books that have appeared over the centuries. So if you're interested in literature in general, if you love a book lover and you like the history of books, this is definitely worthwhile reading. It has some brilliant illustrations. It's really full of pictures that show you what the text is talking about, which really helps bring the ideas to life. It looks at a few different kind of categories like cryptic books that are written in codes, as I said, books made from human skin, written in blood, big books, small books, and anything in between you can think of. But it was a really enjoyable collection that I had great fun reading through, and certainly I found it really interesting and informative. And finally, the last book was another NetGalley one, and it's called How to Live Korean by Kim Soo. And this was, again, a 5-star read for me. As you know, if you watch my TV and film blogs, then you know that I've been watching masses and masses of Korean drama, and I've been learning some Korean, teaching myself. So I had to request this book when I saw it on NetGalley, and it was really brilliant fun. It kind of covers a range of topics. It looks a bit at the history of Korea, the different regions in the country, more of a focus on South Korea, but it does touch on the North as well. And it looks at Korean culture, families and relationships, and some quirky and fun facts. Like I never knew that you shouldn't buy certain foods for your partner because they can lead in folklore or like folk belief into them running off on you, and various things like that. So it was great fun, and I definitely would like to buy a copy of this one and to have on my shelf, because I really enjoyed reading it, and I think it's something I could dip back into now and again and reread as well. So I'm going to end there for today. I've still got, I think I need to read another 12 books by the end of December to complete my Goodreads goal and get to 250. So hopefully I will make it. I have, I think 4 or 5 sitting here waiting at the moment. I've just started one of them. So all being well, I will make it to the finish line on that Goodreads challenge. I am going to be hosting my own NJM book challenge again this year. I've got the graphics and everything ready, and I'll be posting them on my blog and social media in mid-December. So I will also share them again in this vlog, the December version of it, when the time comes. But do keep an eye on my social media as well for that, because I will release it a bit earlier on there. It'll be 25 categories to complete during 2021. So I hope some of you will join me for that. As I said, I'll end there for today, but I'll be back again during December. I've got a couple of scheduled vlogs for you. And then at the end of the month, I'll be doing my TV and film wrap-up and my book reading wrap-up for the end of the month. And in fact, the end of the year as well. So bye for now, everyone. And I will see you all again soon.